David and the Ark of the Covenant. The scene is set in Jerusalem, and David, as you may know, is the reigning king. He is in fact a new king. His predecessor, Saul, is no longer alive, but the consequences of Saul's actions continue to reverberate throughout the kingdom. Saul compromised and messed with a range of things other than his job in the final years of his 40-year reign. Above all, he neglected God's things, unlike David. Understand that the tabernacle, not the believer, was the focal point of worship in David's time. The emphasis on the tabernacle waned through Saul's weak and careless reign. During this time, a particular piece of holy furniture had gotten separated from the tabernacle. If you can believe it, the enemy had carted off the Ark of the Covenant. To today's Gentiles, that doesn't signify much. But in those days, the loss of the Ark meant that the presence of God had departed because the Lord dwelt in His glory upon the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark was so precious to the Lord that He instructed Moses on how to build it and make it portable so that the Israelites might carry it through the wilderness and into Canaan as the principal place of worship. And everywhere the Ark of the Covenant was placed, God's glory rested there, meaning the light, the Shekinah, glory of God, rested on the Ark of the Covenant. That laser-like ray from heaven was central to the worship of Jehovah. Since it represented the presence of Jehovah, it was the holiest place on earth. Now, when David took over the throne, he realized that there was no Ark of the Covenant, no central place of worship. As a result, the people of Israel's spiritual journey had become mediocre. Their heart was anything but hot after God. David, as their leader, understood he had to return that treasured piece of furniture to its proper position. He needed to set everything up the way God intended, even to the point of locating a small piece of furniture and placing it in a specific location. His heart was set on God. When it came to God, David believed that no detail was unimportant. 2 Samuel chapter 6 tells us how he got the Ark of the Covenant back in Jerusalem. 2 Samuel 6, 1-5, NIV. David again brought together all the able young men of Israel, 30,000. He and all his men went up to Baalah in Judah to bring up from there the Ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim on the ark. They set the Ark of God on a new cart and brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the new cart with the Ark of God on it, and Ahio was walking in front of it. David and all Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord, with castanets, harps, lyres, timbrels, sistrums, and cymbals. So here's David rejoicing and celebrating and having the greatest delightful time, knowing that the Ark of the Covenant was coming back home where it belonged, in Zion. There was the sound of music, and there was the delight of obedience beating in the heart of David. The Ark is coming back, hip hip hooray, or conceivably, shalom shalom shalom. Ark of God. Now is a good moment to clarify what the Ark of the Covenant was like, because some of you watching this might imagine it was like Noah's floating barge-like ark, but it wasn't. The name Ark itself means box or chest. God Himself gave the original blueprint to Moses. Moses received the original plan from God Himself. The ark was rectangular in design, composed of wood, and gold-plated both inside and out. It was surrounded by a beautiful gold border that formed a rim. The ark's cover was also an important component. On top of this open chest was a grate, a see-through covering made of gold called the mercy seat. It was exactly the right size for the chest. A hammered gold cherubim, the term for angel, adorned each end of the cover. With their wings outstretched over the golden grate, these golden angels faced each other. These creatures looked down upon the chest. Because a solid gold piece would be incredibly weighty, these cherubim must have been little. They would have made the ark top-heavy if they had been particularly enormous. It would be awkward to carry it. The whole thing had to be mobile. Stay with me, there's more. 3 objects were found beneath the plate in the ark: a golden jar carrying manna from the wilderness, Aaron's ancient rod, and the tables of the covenant, that is, the tablets of stone. God had promised that He would meet with His people above the mercy seat. To us, this sounds so strange. All of our worship is so open and realistic. Now that Christ has come and died, we can see everything. Prior to Calvary, however, so many things of God were found in symbols, types, and pictures, like peering in a murky or smoky mirror. You can see the image, but not the details. They worshipped in this manner. They had a box, and upon that box shone the very glory of God over his golden grate, this mercy seat. To be sure, this piece of furniture was absolutely holy. It was set apart to God. So careful was God with his instructions about it that he even told them how it was to be carried. A gold ring was attached at the base of each of the four corners, and gold-plated poles were threaded through these rings to carry the entire chest, ensuring that no human hand ever touched the ark itself. God further commanded that only Levites were to handle the tabernacle furniture and that the poles were to be carried on their shoulders. God cared about every detail of their worship, including how the ark was moved from one location to another. And it was there that David got himself into trouble. You see, David was an expedient kind of man. He was a practical person. David was the king and the one who made the decisions. He understood that the people required the Ark of the Covenant in order to worship. The quickest and most efficient way to transport the Ark of the Covenant down the hill from Obed-Edom's house was via cart. So David ordered them to get a new cart, place it underneath the chest, and tell a few men to, quote, haul it down to Jerusalem. So they're bringing it down this way when Uzzah and Ahio, two of Obed-Edom's sons, guiding the cart, when something terrible happens. 2 Samuel chapter 6, 6 and 7. But when they arrived at the threshing floor of Nacon, the oxen stumbled, and Uzzah reached out his hand and steadied the ark of God. Then the Lord's anger was aroused against Uzzah, and God struck him dead because of this. So Uzzah died right there beside the ark of God. Uzzah stretched out to save the ark from tipping over. He didn't do anything else. Wasn't that, after all, the reasonable thing to do? You have to grab it rather than letting it slide off the cart and perhaps shatter or bend it, right? Well, what's right? Let me tell you what's right. If they had carried it exactly as God had instructed, it would not have been in jeopardy. Remember how the Levites carried the ark by sliding the poles through the tiny ringlets at the bottom of the chest? The poles were to be placed on the shoulders of these specially selected men who were to balance the holy chest as it was moved from one location to another. David, on the other hand, did not do so. He picked a convenient path and altered the details to suit the hour's needs. Never do something that isn't right. Do nothing until everything is in order. Then go for it with everything you've got. That is sound advice. But David said, we need to get it down here. Who cares how we do it so long as we get it here? God did. And to prove it, he took Uzzah's life. Now here's David standing alongside a corpse, and he gets mad. 2 Samuel 6, verse 8. Then David was angry because the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uzzah, and to this day that place is called Perez Uzzah. We have David standing there and raged at the Lord while the Lord was angry with David. Well, was he a man after God's heart? You might be thinking right now. Having a heart for God doesn't mean you're perfect. It means you're sensitive. It means every detail is important. And when you realize you're incorrect, you own up to it. You own up. You come to terms with it. Verse 9 says, 2 Samuel, verse 6, 9, David was afraid of the Lord that day and said, how can the ark of the Lord ever come to me? The issue was that David had failed to complete his homework. We frequently get into problems when we don't do our homework, when we believe we can see very clearly what the Lord's plan is, and so we rush off to do it our way out of expediency or convenience, typically in a hurry. Ananias and Sapphira performed the same thing hundreds of years later. They made assumptions about the Lord and failed to take him seriously. We see Uzzah the same way, taken from the earth because he touched an ultra-holy article of furniture that was not to be touched, especially by a non-Levite. Who cares about the Levites? God does. Who cares about little ringlets and golden shafts that run through them? God does. He wouldn't have spoken anything about it if he didn't care, and because he is concerned, we must be concerned as well. After a man lost his life in transporting the ark of God, David was afraid, and David was unwilling to transfer the ark of the Lord into the city of David with him. 2 Samuel 6, 10. He was not willing to take the ark of the Lord to be with him in the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. It cost him a man's life the last time he tried. Leave it, David said. They placed it in the house of a man named Obed-Edom. 3 months have gone by. There is no ark in Jerusalem, and David's stomach is churning as he wonders what is going on. I want the Lord's ark to be brought here, and it's in Obed-Edom's possession. What's the matter? Obed-Edom is having a fantastic time. He's getting all the blessing. 2 Samuel 6:12. Now King David was told, "The Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and everything he has because of the ark of God." So David went to bring up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. Now hold on a second. He didn't touch it. However, it is said here that he brought it up. Why is it that he wouldn't touch anything a few verses ago, but a few verses later he will? "Bring it in," he says a few verses later. I'll show you. In a parallel passage in 1 Chronicles 15, we see what happened behind the scenes. 1 Chronicles 15, 1-13. After David had constructed buildings for himself in the city of David, he prepared a place for the ark of God and pitched a tent for it. Then David said, "No one but the Levites may carry the ark of God, because the Lord chose them to carry the ark of the Lord and to minister before him forever." David assembled all Israel in Jerusalem to bring up the ark of the Lord to the place he had prepared for it. He called together the descendants of Aaron and the Levites. From the descendants of Kohath, Uriel, the leader of 120 relatives. From the descendants of Merari, Asaiah, the leader of 220 relatives. From the descendants of Gershon, Joel, the leader of 130 relatives. From the descendants of Elizaphan, Shemaiah, the leader of 200 relatives. From the descendants of Hebron, Eliel, the leader of 80 relatives. From the descendants of Uzziel, Aminadab, the leader of 112 relatives. Then David summoned Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, and Uriel, Asaiah, Joel, Shemaiah, Eliel, and Aminadab, the Levites. He said to them, "You are the heads of the Levitical families. You and your fellow Levites are to consecrate yourselves and bring up the ark of the Lord, the God of Israel, to the place I've prepared for it. It was because you, the Levites, did not bring it up the first time that the Lord our God broke out in anger against us. We did not inquire of him about how to do it in the prescribed way." What went wrong? Well, one of David's counselors, no doubt, or the Lord himself, spoke to David and said, "You know the law specifically states before the ark or any furniture can be moved, it has to be moved a certain way by a certain group of people." And David, who's hot after God, reacted. All they had to do was put the poles upon the shoulders, and you have to let the Levites carry this thing, and then you could move the precious ark of God. And being a man after God's own heart, David gets it. He had previously just hurried out there to get the job done, and he had been burned. What is the main point of the poles and ringlets? And surely the Lord isn't interested with such intricacies. Wrong. If God cared enough to write it and preserve it, he cares enough about the specifics to have you and me carry it out exactly as he intended. And that's exactly what David did in the end. David was indeed remarkable. 2 Samuel 6:13. When those who were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf. Every 6 steps, these guys are standing there watching this thing go up, and David is very cautious. You don't want to mess with something that God has made quite specific about. He's a man after God's heart. He is concerned with what God is concerned about. And when he heard the truth, he desired to follow God's instructions. 6 paces, fatling. 6 paces, fatling. Finally, they get the ark into Jerusalem, and look at what David is doing. 2 Samuel 6:14 and 15. Wearing a linen ephod, David was dancing before the Lord with all his might, while he and all Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sound of trumpets. When you mention David, most people will immediately make the connection. Oh yes, David and Goliath. Alternately, people will see David as the man who committed adultery with Bathsheba. When some people hear the name David, they recall Samuel anointing him as king when he was still a youngster. Some people envision David as a warrior, or consider the story of David and Saul, or consider David's deep and enduring friendship with Jonathan. None of those traits, however, are what God remembers about his faithful king, his man, his choice. If you want to see what God remembers about David, you'll have to turn to the New Testament, the book of Acts, chapter 13, verse 22. And after he, God, had removed him, Saul, he raised up David to be their king, concerning whom he also testified and said, I have found David the son of Jesse, a man after my heart, who will do all my will. Acts 13:22. What a commemoration! It wasn't, I found David to be a faithful shepherd, or I found David to be a great warrior, or I found David to be a brilliant king. None of those things. It says, I found David to care about the things I care about. He is a man whose heart beats in harmony with mine. Whenever I look to the right, David also looks to the right. Whenever I look to the left, David also looks to the left. When I remark, I'm concerned about that, David responds, I'm concerned about that too. That's being a man, a person, after God's heart.